Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Richard Kroll and Mark Weaver.
Mark, thanks for putting me first. I kind of deserve that, and it's good to be back. I haven't seen you in a while.
I've been vacationing a little bit, a little jaunt to Italy.
A small jaunt to Italy. How many vacations a year do you actually have? Five or six?
I aim for 4, but the 2 of them are around long weekends, so it's really only 2.5 weeks off or something like that.
You are leading a charmed American dream life.
I do try. And by the way, happy anniversary to my wonderful wife, 31 years today. I'm spending my anniversary with Rich Kroll.
That's disturbing.
And you know, the funny thing is, she probably won't even ever hear this, but at least everyone that listens to our podcast will know that I wished her a happy anniversary. She won't hear it, but you know.
Does she even remember it's your anniversary?
So she knows it's our anniversary. She won't listen to the podcast.
Oh, I got it. I got you.
All right, Richie, before we go into the agenda, any tips of the day for our wonderful listeners?
I do. I want to reach out to all the parents in our listener base and remind them to be patient with their know-it-all entitled children. Because...
Is that a nice way of saying it?
I don't know. I think it's an accurate way to say it because although we love them dearly, they typically figure out how to know it all even by the time they're 13, 16, 20. So just remember, we're the adults in the family. Have some patience. Shrug it off. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it.
That sounds like a wonderful tip, and we all could use that from time to time, right, Rich?
Myself included, probably every week. Also, friends and family, listen, I love you dearly, and I've donated to every one of your requests over the last 2 decades, from buying 30 boxes of Girl Scout cookies to donating to the Save the Pacific Edible Seaweed Bike-a-thon. So,
missions trips.
you name it, right? And I'll gladly keep doing it. That's not the issue. It's we need some help because the show costs money.
We need patrons, folks.
I sent an email out to a select 120 of my closest friends, and no response. I don't even think you guys read it. I don't blame you. It was boring. But even $5 a month to our Patreon account would be helpful because I owe Mark money for this studio, and it's the only way I can pay him back.
Well, we appreciate everyone's consideration to be a part of our show, and I can tell you that we enjoy providing you this content. We want to continue providing this content to you, and for those of you that wish to partner with us, we would surely appreciate it. So coming up on the show today, I have some Idiot of the Week nominees for Rich. We can get through those pretty quick, because we have a big show, a lot of content to get through on this show, Rich. We had told the listeners we were going to do the Mueller report post-mortem this show, but in the last week and a half or 2 weeks since we did the last show, a lot has happened. And Richie came to me and said, hey, you know, I think we should expand the scope of this show because we got, obviously, the China tariff issue. We got, of course, the Mueller report. We have Venezuela. We have the potential war with Iran. There's a lot of saber rattling. And of course, there's these abortion laws going into place, which, you know, doesn't directly affect Trump, but I do think it's a part of a broader culture war, for lack of a better term, you know, and how it might affect the 2020 election. So we're going to talk a lot of politics on today's show, and mostly around Trump and how it affects Trump. I've termed the title, Rich, Trump, Is This So Much Winning? If you remember in his campaign, he promised that we were going to be winning so much that we'd be tired of winning. Remember
winning every week.
and that was his campaign. So my question of our show title is this really so much winning? And then we're going to conclude the show with taking a quick quiz for Richie on some of the Democratic candidates for president that have announced. There's 23 Democratic candidates so far.
Wow.
And I'm going to give you some of their policies they're known for and see if you know who I'm talking about. They're the bigger name ones, so don't worry.
I may fail that quiz miserably. Oh, by the way, when you took off for your happy trails in Italy, all hell broke loose, hence why I thought we should expand the topic today.
Well, that was a good suggestion, and we'll see if we can get through it. It's probably going to be a little bit of a long episode, folks, but here we go. All right, Richie, nominee number 1 for Idiots of the Week. And by the way, I know how much I personally selected this for you because I know how much you love self-absorbed millennials, and I know how much you love social media and how they view social media. And by the way, we've had a person taking a selfie getting killed in front of a bear on our show. Remember that one?
Have.
We had a woman taking a picture hanging out a car window topless and got decapitated by a sign.
Yes, I remember that one.
We've had a bunch of them. So this isn't quite that bad, but
Don't forget the bear that the
ordered ice cream.
the zoo owners took through the ice cream drive-through.
It's one of your favorites, by
That
the way.
is.
All right, here we go. Are you really ready to die for a picture? That's what one Instagram user asked after seeing a photo of Belgian couple Camille and Jean kissing while dangling out of a moving train in Sri Lanka. They posted the dangerous-looking shot on May 2nd on their account, Backpack Diaries. While some of their 211...
Backpack diarrhea?
Diarrhea. Yeah, I'll actually break protocol and show it to Richie here because it is a very wonderful picture from a photographic point of view, but it's crazy. So some of their 210,000 followers called the shop epic and perfection. Others blasted the pair from Brussels, whose bio says they're on an indefinite honeymoon for setting the risky example of wannabe influencers. Lots of people are going to try this and injure themselves or worse. Wow, what a foolish thing to do were some of the comments posted. This is the best part, Rich. While Camille and Jean used a self-timer to take most of their photos, the Sri Lankan train shot required an extra pair of hands. Jean's brother, who was traveling with them, took about 500 shots over the course of an hour to get that one shot.
Holy cow, Batman.
This is what this generation's doing. They take 500 photos of themselves to get one perfect one, and they probably touched that up, because it is a beautiful picture, but they probably touched it up with Photoshop. But why don't you describe what they're doing, Richie, for the listeners?
It is actually a really cool photo, but I'll have my comment in a minute. So it's a blue, like, double-decker train.
Over a gorge.
Bending around a gorge forest. There's trees above it, trees to the side of it, trees below it. And the guy's hanging on with one arm outstretched, and the girl's hanging on with two reversed, like pull the shoulder out of your socket grips behind her, completely extended. I mean, if they passed a tree or a tunnel or a fence or anything, they're goners.
Or if they just slip, they're gone.
Even if this was a still photo, like the train was at a dead stop,
It was moving. The train
it would
was
still be dangerous because if you slip,
right.
you're going to fall,
40
100
feet, yeah.
into a bunch of trees.
Right. So that's nominee number 1. I know how much you love millennials and social media, and you can make comments at the end. The second one, Rich, is kind of a since we're talking Trump and politics, I thought I'd bring this up, but also this is kind of a follow-up one because we had this gentleman as an idiot nominee prior. Televangelist Jim Baker sells
He's back.
$45 Trump coin, calls it a point of contact with God.
Oh, my.
Remember he was selling the, what was it, the VD cure or something, the syphilis
Yeah,
cure?
the snake oil that wouldn't fix a hangnail.
For only $45, you can establish a point of contact with God via a gold-plated coin engraved with President Trump and King Cyrus's face.
What?
King Cyrus. I'll get to that in a second. The coin is being peddled by Lance Wallnall in conjunction with Jim Baker, who claims God told him the people needed to pray for Trump in his re-election in 2020.
Oh, my goodness.
When I asked the Lord why the coin, he said, the Lord said, because when you take the coin, it's a point of contact. So your faith is being released with 1 million other believers to pray protection and peace and wisdom and counsel over the President of the United States and his family. The coin features Trump and Cyrus along with the words 70-year decree and Cyrus Trump proclamation. Trump had been compared by some to the Persian king after recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital in 2017. So that's the tie-in with Cyrus because Cyrus...
Got it. Thank you for the clarification.
So those are your nominees, Richie, this week.
Well, listen, if God truly wanted to create a conduit through Jim Baker, through Trump to the American people for the 2020 election, there'd probably be a way to do it as a donation or a giveaway. He's making how much per coin?
Well, I don't know how much the profit, but it's $45.
Oh, yeah, it's $45. Probably making $40 profit per coin. So let me go back to the millennial couple hanging out of a 100-mile-an-hour train around at 100 feet in the air. It is so idiotic. It reminds me of the poor...
I'm giggling today. I don't know why. I can't
You have the
stop.
giggles. I'm going to have them soon. It reminds me of there's a lot of daredevils out there, and they are dying in the selfies.
Yeah.
The poor Japanese skyscraper climbing kid,
Spider-Man or whatever it was?
Spider-Man. He was at the top of a 150-story building in Japan. He hung off the side of the very top, was doing pull-ups and whatever else he was going to do, and then slipped. And he died, and he's a hero, but he's dead. All right? So, hey, millennials, general rule of thumb when it comes to taking a selfie. If something goes wrong, even something minor, and the end result is death
Or serious injury?
or serious injury or maiming yourself for the rest of your life,
Or sterilization or,
all the
erectile
above.
dysfunction.
I highly recommend against it. So I would normally choose them, but any pastor, former or present, supposed man of God that tries to get us to reelect Trump, who I'm not saying I wouldn't do, but who tries to get us to reelect Trump through selling $45 gold coins, saying it's a conduit through the word of God, is absolutely the biggest idiot of the week, way ahead of these knucklehead millennial daredevils.
And don't you just hate people that use religion to manipulate people? I mean, it's just...
That's what gives religion a bad name, and a lot of folks will now take shots at Christians
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah. Last episode, I told the audience how much I hate people that abuse power, like cops or the teacher that drew on the kid's head. But yeah, for sure, this qualifies. So send $1, Richie,
I'm going to send
to
$1.
Jim Baker's Tammy Face fund.
Yeah, I'm going to send it
She's dead,
directly.
by the way.
She is. Well, then I'll send it directly to Jim.
He's got a new wife. All right, so we're going to transition to what started out as a Mueller report post-mortem, and I'm going to cover that, or we're going to cover that, but we're going to expand a little bit and bring it into some of the other things in the what I'll call the chaos president, Donald Trump. He tends to thrive in chaos. You notice that, Trump? And there's a lot of chaos going on. He seems to
needs
like it.
He
seems
needs
to like
chaos,
it.
whether he responds positively or negatively.
And I'm sure, when we put Trump in the title, we're going to get a lot of downloads. He's a very attention-grabbing individual. He's very polarizing, and I'm sure that's true with our audience as well. So I'm sure we'll get lots of feedback. Send us your feedback on the episode. We'd like to hear it. Supporting listeners at areweidiots.com, on Twitter at areweidiots. Give us some feedback on how we do today. So here goes, Richie. All right, first we'll tackle the Mueller report. So I read the whole thing.
That makes you a weirdo, by the way.
It's been a month or so I don't have probably total recall on what I read, but it was many, many hours of reading. I felt I owed it to myself because not only because of the show, but I have an interest in politics and was in the news for 2 years. But I'll do my best summary. And again, the listeners know I am not totally against Trump. I like several things that he's done. Gorsuch is the main one. I like the fact that he was willing to talk to North Korea. I like the fact that he cut taxes. The problem was he didn't do the other thing and cut spending. There's a number of things that I like that he's done, but I largely disagree with most of what he's done. So here we go on the Mueller report. So the Mueller report was broken into two parts. The first part one was mostly about what Russia did to affect the election. And again, don't criticize me if I don't get every detail because it was 500, how many pages? 500 pages or something like that?
460?
Whatever it was. There was a lot of redacted information as well, so it was a lot shorter than that. But essentially, the Russians thought Trump would be better for them. Vladimir Putin hated Hillary Clinton. That was well established. They thought that Trump would be better for them. They started through a variety of methods, social media and other. You've heard about all these things. But they absolutely were at many, many levels interfering in our election and trying to sow discourse amongst us. They were trying to get Trump elected because they thought it would be better for them. About partial way through the campaign, the people working on the Trump campaign recognized this, welcomed it, liked what the Russians were doing, knew that they would help them. But they did not up front have any quid pro quo with the Russians. They didn't think of it. They didn't start it. There was no collusion of that sort. I believe that. I've believed it from the very beginning. I never thought that Trump was smart enough, frankly, to have thought of that. He was just probably surprised he was doing it, and it was well documented that he had a very small campaign staff. He was probably just a whirling dervish trying to just keep up with the campaign. So anyhow, they welcomed the help from the Russians, and they liked the result. And what happened was it worked. The Russian intelligence services had a major win here. So that's the summary of part one of the report, that there's no doubt the Russians were all over this. They succeeded in an intelligence operation that was a terrific win for the Russian intelligence. So what are your thoughts on that before we go into the more controversial piece?
So I don't know if the report mentioned this. And by the way, yeah, you're an elite academic wacko for reading the whole report, but we thank you for it, because I would not read that report. I don't know if the report mentioned this, but I read a while back that one of the ways the Russians influenced the election was through phishing attacks, which is basically making an email look like it's coming from somebody you trust or know, or an organization you trust or know. After they hacked into a database that showed millions of U.S. voters that were either independent or through polling on the fence about who to vote for, and they specifically targeted those vulnerable voters with this propaganda, anti-Hillary propaganda. And again, Trump had nothing to do with it, but he sure as heck didn't mind it. And I heard that was one way, which is pretty brilliant. So I think...
And there was other stuff on there on the DNC hacking, the WikiLeaks. There was a bunch of stuff around this whole realm, but I'm just trying to summarize it for the listeners. There is absolutely no doubt the Russians were helping Trump. They knew they were helping Trump. Trump knew it. Trump campaign people knew it, but they did not plan and coordinate together. There was just, they recognized what was going on and they welcomed it, but they didn't really collude with them.
So this is an education for our listeners and either Trump lovers or Trump haters. As we both know, there's very few people in the middle. Most people either hate Trump or love Trump. I'm actually one of the few in the middle. But folks, the key to know is this. The Russians absolutely influenced the election. There's no question about it. But Democrats, there was no proactive, covert Trump collusion involved.
Correct.
So most Trump lovers say, hey, there was no collusion and the Russians weren't involved. And most Trump haters say there was absolute Trump collusion. So I just want to make that point clear for our listeners.
Yeah. And that leads us into part two of the Mueller report, was Trump's egomaniacal obsession about the fact that he was worried about his legitimacy as president, because he knew, and that's the reason he was obstructing justice, which we'll get into in a second. He knew he was obstructing the investigation because he knew if it got out there and it was well known that the Russians helped him win, that he felt that he would be delegitimized as president. And, you know, I guess that's a legitimate fear because it did happen. He was helped. Would he have won anyway? No one can know. No one can know. No one can know exactly how many votes they helped with. They definitely targeted the swing states, the Russians. I mean, so they were sophisticated in going after the swing states and the areas that they thought could affect Trump. But that's what drove part two. And part two can best be summarized by some quotes from the Mueller report. I'm not making this up or anything. These are quotes. Our investigation found multiple acts by the president that were capable of exerting undue influence over law enforcement investigations, including the Russian interference and obstruction investigations, Mueller wrote. The incidents were often carried out through one-on-one meetings in which the president sought to use his official power outside of usual channels. These actions ranged from efforts to remove the special counsel and to reverse the effects of the Attorney General's recusal, that's Jeff Sessions, to the attempt to use the official power to limit the scope of the investigation, to direct and indirect contacts with witnesses with the potential to influence their testimony. Mueller, however, refrained from recommending prosecution, saying that there were, quote, difficult legal issues that would need to be resolved in order to reach a conclusion that a crime of obstruction of justice was committed by Trump. Factoring into his decision not to weigh in on prosecution, Mueller wrote, this was an opinion issued by the Office of Legal Counsel finding that, quote, the indictment of criminal prosecution of a sitting president would impermissibly undermine the capacity of the executive branch to perform its constitutionally assigned functions in violations of the constitutional separations of powers. Last paragraph, I know you're getting antsy.
Just kidding, this is interesting.
Before we determine not to make a traditional prosecutional judgment, basically this is Mueller punting. We did not draw ultimate conclusions about the president's conduct, Mueller wrote. Mueller emphasized, however, that his analysis of the evidence did not clear the president of obstruction. Said Mueller, if we had confidence after a thorough investigation of the facts that the president clearly did not commit obstruction of justice, we would so state. Based on the facts and the applicable legal standards, we were unable to reach that judgment. So basically, that's the part where Trump was not exonerated. Mueller is basically saying through all that, hey, he's the president of the United States. There's almost no precedent to prosecute a sitting president for this. He clearly obstructed justice. He clearly, in my mind, committed crimes, but they were not to the point where they had prosecutable crimes for a president. That's really what it came down to. What do you think about that, Richie?
So, we once did a show on fake news, and you have to evaluate the source and the motivation behind it. And
this guy's a Republican, by the way.
I looked into this guy, Mueller.
Yeah. He's a Boy Scout.
Yeah, he has a multi-decade history of credibility, sincerity, honesty, and an upstanding citizen. And clearly, I think he, if you read this, he did want to get out into the general population information about the obstruction,
right?
But he also didn't want to go down in history as the one that dimed him out, to be ultimately remembered in case there was enough there to start impeachment proceedings. So
yeah,
I don't blame him.
He definitely punted the final decision.
And I don't
There's no
blame
doubt about
him.
that.
I mean, there was a big weight put on his shoulders, but he has investigated many, many extremely complex scenarios for the FBI.
Right.
Whether it was related to Bill Clinton, to 9/11. So he's very credible in what he's doing. So anything he says in this report, clearly there's no agenda or malicious agenda against Trump, or in favor of not. So he reported it. And I think for most people, they thought that the Trump, quote, exoneration meant
that was his tweet. Totally exonerated.
Right? That he was off the hook for everything.
Yeah.
But Okay, so he's off the hook for collusion with Russia, but he's not.
And he was
off-
not prosecuted. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah,
He
he's
didn't
not off-
collude, and he's not prosecuted because he's the president. But he committed obstruction. There's no doubt about it. And many times did he commit obstruction.
And I also understand that the majority of all Republicans in the House and Senate didn't even read the report.
Right.
So,
Right.
hey, it's a slippery slope.
And then I have to throw this in there because as you and I both know, from a moral perspective, Trump has never been someone we should look up to. But it's so clear when you read this report. There's direct quotes, and they describe all these situations and where Trump is there is no such thing as morality, and there's no such thing as doing the right thing. There's no such thing as honesty. It's all about, what do I have to say in this moment to get out of it? What do I have to put pressure on people to say to help me get out of it? This is all these acts that I read this paragraph on. I mean, it's just morally reprehensible, his conduct, and people around him too, his family and everything. The lawyer, what he's telling his lawyer to do, what he's telling Jeff Sessions to do, what he's telling his chief of staff to do. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Well, even Trump supporters have to admit he has a monstrous ego.
Yeah.
He loves the spotlight. He wants everyone to love him. And anybody that jumps on Twitter within 10 seconds of anything negative, no president's ever done that. So it's kind of strange. He is a publicity seeker who doesn't want anything negative. And I word it this way. Would any Trump supporter or Trump lover, or anybody that's even neutral on Trump, allow their wife or daughter in a room with alcohol with a locked door? I don't think anybody would say yes to that.
Nobody would. And the funny thing is, because I find myself a little bit torn here, because it's ironic that I didn't believe that Trump colluded with the Russians to begin with. But the irony is, it's just like in a lot of other situations. It's not the original act that got him in trouble. It's the trying to cover it up. It's the trying to obstruct justice and obstruct the investigation into something he didn't do. He didn't collude. That's where it all started. And the funny thing is, what he really did wrong and criminal in my mind was after the fact trying to obstruct when he didn't do anything wrong in the first place.
So let me play devil's advocate.
Okay.
The whole purpose of the Mueller investigation was to determine collusion in the election, right?
Correct.
Now, they found a lot of other stuff from pursuing that investigation.
Correct.
Is it right for you, me,
Scope
or
creep.
the world to go after that now? So, for instance, let's say
Ken Starr did it with Clinton. I mean, he went way beyond the original scope of Clinton and then found all this other stuff.
but
So
you're a huge backer of the Constitution.
I am.
So if
But
somebody
special counsel is not in the Constitution.
Okay, and so let me ask you this, just an analogy question. So if somebody was brought to trial for, say, assault, okay, and they were found innocent, but during the trial deliberations, it came out that they were illegally selling drugs.
The judge would strike it. That you were not allowed to bring that up in trial.
Okay, so in this case, can't we say, hey, look, it happened, but
Special counsel is a creation of the Justice Department and and Congress. So it's not really, it's their rules. It's not really constitutional.
but
And
it's
there's
hard,
so many administrative laws that are on the books that are not constitutional. I mean,
but it's kind of hard to, I think I'm beat up from the Democrats constantly looking for any angle whatsoever, never acknowledging anything that Trump does that's good, only going after what's bad, and then making stuff up. They make up their own fake news. It's just a constant belligerent battle. They're so focused on tax returns and other nonsense versus what's important to the American people that, is it right for them now to go down the path of obstruction when the whole purpose of this was collusion?
They never got over the election upset. I mean, they thought Hillary was going to be coronated, and it was shocked everyone. And there's some of them that still just can't accept the fact that Trump out-campaigned and was the biggest loser, or the best worst candidate, or whatever you want to call it.
I'm confused on what that means, but I get it. The lesser of two evils.
Yes, the lesser of two evils. That's a better way of saying it.
So, in conclusion,
Yep.
I don't. Hey, look, he's exonerated for collusion, but it brought up some other things to the
Obstruction.
forefront.
Yeah.
With obstruction, I think we just move on.
Well, this week, my favorite Congressman Justin Amash from Michigan was the first Republican to come out and say that Trump did enough to support being impeached. There is some building momentum around impeachment. Nancy Pelosi does not believe that that's a good strategy for the Democrats. Of course, we all know Trump will not be convicted in the Senate because the Senate is all lackey Republicans. So it doesn't really matter whether he gets impeached or not. I don't think. I mean, it'll be a stain on his record, but he's not going to get convicted and thrown out of the presidency by the Senate. So I don't know if it's 50-50 right now whether the House impeaches him or not. I don't know. What's your bet?
I think it's too complex, convoluted, and they need to really focus on other issues that the public cares about. Because I think in the end, if they just keep going down this rat hole, it's going to hurt the Democrats and guarantee Trump gets elected. The opposite of what they want.
And you're on the same page with Nancy Pelosi, but that's what she believes. So let's move to some of those other issues that you speak of, Rich. So the biggest one in my wheelhouse is tariffs, and Rich is already he's shifting in his seat because he knows it's my hot button. As the listeners know, I'm an economics person. I love economics. I read about it in my spare time. I have for 40 years almost. And let me just say this about tariffs before I go crazy. Trump went to Wharton, the same school as me. It's one of the best business schools in the country. I can guarantee you he did not learn about tariffs at Wharton. Tariffs are a political tool. They're not an economic tool. And Trump's whole premise around tariffs is wrong. Would you like me to explain?
Oh, gosh. Folks, if you can hear this.
It's Rich banging his head against the wall.
And I just punched myself in the face. I apologize for opening up this can of worms, but if there is anybody qualified to educate us again on this, it's Mark.
So I will be as succinct as possible, and I'll try to put it in layman's terms, right? So Trump is an economic nationalist. He's a nationalist, and he's using tariffs for economic nationalism. So Trump's premise for slapping tariffs on China is that we're, quote, losing on trade. You've heard him say this 1,000 times.
The trade deficit.
With trade deficit. Trump infers that because we have a trade imbalance with China, and I've heard him say it many times, we're losing $500 billion a year. We're losing $500 billion a year. Okay. Let me explain this to you guys with a simple example. Rich, where do you shop for groceries? What store?
Costco or Whole Foods.
Okay. So how much do you spend there approximately a month? Just ballpark.
A month?
Yeah, approximately.
$500.
Okay, $500. How much does Costco spend with you?
Right now?
Yeah. How much do they buy from you?
Zero.
Zero? Well, you're losing on trade with Costco. You're losing on trade, Rich, according to Donald Trump.
That pisses me off.
You should be. You should place a tariff on them. See, folks, it's perfectly natural it's called comparative advantage, right? So, in specialization, we are not losing on trade to China because we have a trade imbalance. We may have a surplus with other countries. We have a deficit with China. And by the way, you don't lose when you trade. Governments don't trade. Businesses trade. Individuals trade, right? So if IBM is buying server parts from China, they get the parts from China and they send China money. Did someone lose in that transaction? No, it's not possible to lose in a voluntary transaction. All trade is voluntary. And when it's voluntary, it's impossible to lose because you both agree to it. This is so frustrating. And so many people at a very base level don't understand that. When Trump says we're losing on trade, he's lying to you. There is no such truth to it. Just think about it. Before I go on, how am I doing so far?
Well, I want to check your blood pressure because we have more show to finish. I'm still upset that Costco isn't buying anything from me.
Yeah, you should be. And Starbucks isn't buying anything from me. And My car dealership, isn't buying anything from me. I
thank you.
I have 1,000 trade deficits with different vendors. All I have is a surplus with my employer. That's it.
Thank you for the Wharton education. That's actually helpful.
All right. Now, here's the other thing. Trump says that, well, if you don't want to pay the tariffs, just build the products here in America, which that sounds great, right? That sounds, wow, what could be wrong with that? Just everything would be just built here and we'd all have jobs and that'd be great. The problem is, folks, that also doesn't work. Rich, when you and I were starting to drive, it was probably late 70s, something like that. What were the majority of the cars in the country? American cars, right?
Ford trucks.
Ford, Chevy, Chrysler. There was a few Volkswagens around and stuff like that.
Plymouth station wagons.
Plymouth station wagon. I had an International Scout that I drove. And for the most part, folks, if you're old enough, you remember the cars were not very good. They didn't last very long. They rusted out. They were unreliable. And suddenly, the Japanese, mostly, the Germans too, started shipping cars into this country. And what happened over the last 35 or 40 years? One of the most reliable and the best used cars to buy, they're Japanese cars. They're Toyotas, they're Hondas, right? They're Volkswagens, whatever, right? And the reality is that with more supply and more competition, it made everyone better, right? And so that's why we have better cars that last 10, 15, 20 years. You get a lot of value. There's a lot of competition. It came in from overseas. We just didn't have American manufacturers doing it. The consumer wins. And so that's what would happen in this case is if Trump said everything comes back to the U.S., the problem with that is if costs go up and wages go up because you have U.S. labor is more expensive than other places in the world, those U.S. companies would have to still compete with other companies around the world who could produce that same product with cheaper labor. So it doesn't work. These manufacturing jobs are not coming back to the U.S. There'll be robotic jobs or AI or automated manufacturing, but these jobs are not coming back to the U.S. that once were done by Americans. The labor's too cheap somewhere else in the world. If it's not China, it's Vietnam or Sri Lanka or Cambodia or anywhere else. And that's what he doesn't get, and he just lies consistently to people who don't know any better.
Can
I take a breath?
Take a breath while I go out and rip the Buy American bumper sticker off my Volkswagen.
But now that's the other thing. Some of these manufacturers are actually they're foreign manufacturers building in this country. So I don't want to get tweets from people saying that I was wrong there. They're built all over the world, and that's the thing. That's why we have this problem with Mexico because a lot of the car parts are built in Mexico, and Trump's trying to bring that back too. So it's multifaceted, folks. But the bottom line is, when Trump tries to put these tariffs on, Rich even acknowledges that it raises costs to the consumers. It helps a very select few people, like steel and aluminum tariffs that he put on or whatever it is. But the people that use those parts as components are 99% of it, and the consumers are 99% of it. Only 1% are helped by tariffs. It's an awful thing. Every economist that's ever lived knows this, except Peter Navarro, Trump's guy. He's a flat earther in the economic realm, and it's just flat out economically wrong. I think Trump knows it, and he's just evil. But he's believed this for a long time. Trump has believed in tariffs for a long time. So I'm skeptical. I think he might actually believe it's good.
So to keep you on the rails,
Okay.
Reduce your blood pressure, and
Okay.
also for time purposes,
Yeah.
I'd like to conclude the tariff portion with this question.
Okay.
I do think that China's done a lot of egregious things to the U.S. over the years, including stealing intellectual property.
Well, that's theft. Okay. I'll
but
give you that. But
okay.
that's
Would
theft.
you let me finish?
Okay.
So I don't know what the answer is. That's why I'm asking you, Mr. Wharton, economics grad. Instead of tariffs, let's say there are some things we'd like to, quote, get back at China for, or even the playing field, or whatever you want to say, especially with the American public believing we've been taken advantage of, or there's something we need to fix with China. What would be a course of action politically to do that other than tariffs?
So I'm not a big believer in any kind of trade agreements because free trade should be just free trade. But we had a, quote, trade agreement with what's called TPP. Again, I'm not espousing that, but something like that, where you align other countries to gang up on China and economically isolate them, move trade amongst other nations, not through China. So all these other Asian nations that were supposed to be part of TPP, we could be sourcing product in Vietnam or like Sri Lanka or Cambodia or Singapore or all these other ones, that Australia, New Zealand. We were going to isolate China that way, but because of this economic nationalism that both Bernie Sanders and Trump were touting in the last election cycle, and Hillary Clinton even backed away from TPP because she knew it was a winner. Don't get me wrong. Trump is a brilliant politician. He knows that people are stupid and voters are stupid, and he knows that this appeals to our worst instinct of nationalism, and he knows it sells, and so does Bernie Sanders. So I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, and I know that the populace isn't educated in economics anytime soon, so I don't think anything changes. But if I were them, I would isolate them. I would lower all trade barriers. If China wants to put tariffs on us, on our company stuff in there, let them. You're basically taxing your own citizens. If you consistently overpay for products like China citizens have to do because China slaps a tariff on our stuff, how long can that last? Their citizens are overpaying for everything.
Well, doesn't that hurt our manufacturing?
Who
in some
cares?
respect?
They're overpaying for it. How long can that last? If you overpay for stuff your whole life, how long would that last?
But wouldn't that impact our exports?
Sell somewhere else. There's 180 countries in the world.
Yeah, but there's
Okay.
2 billion Chinese
But
if they're buying American products.
Okay, but that's a short-term thing. If China wants to tax their own citizens and them overpay for stuff, why wouldn't we let
Well,
them?
I'll tell you, I'm fairly intelligent. I get the negatives of tariffs, although you don't like to give anybody credit for understanding that. I do see a potential hit on our manufacturer.
Okay, but we can't control what China does. If they want to tax their own citizens, let them.
All right, fair enough. We're
All right, let's
getting
move on.
a great education from our libertarian representative from Pennsylvania, Mark Weaver.
All right, we're getting a little long in the tooth here. War in Iran, Rick. War in Iran, Richie. Trump is now saber rattling, I guess is the best term, with Iran. As the listeners know, he canceled the Iran agreement that Obama booked with Iran before he left office. Trump canceled
Iran
that.
or Iran?
Iran, whatever. And so now Iran, who's, quote, a troublemaker in the Middle East, is, of course, an enemy of Saudi Arabia. And this is a Shiite war that's been going on for thousands of years. The Saudis hate and compete with Iran in the Middle East. And Trump, of course, is close with the Saudis, and Jared Kushner's close with Mohammed bin Salman. And Saudi Arabia wants us to put the squeeze on Iran, and that's what we're doing, like good partners. That's what they think. So what do you think about that, Rich? It sounds to me like a repeat of Iraq, Libya, Syria, and all the other places we get involved with war. The warmongers, John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, are at it again and trying to convince Trump we need to go to war. I hate it. We shouldn't be even considering it.
Well, it's like a poker game where somebody raises somebody, then somebody else comes over the top and raises them, and then then the next guy comes over and raises again. The next guy goes all in. Look, we all know that Iran is funding a lot of the Middle East terrorist groups, Hezbollah and ISIS and everybody else. So I'm all for squashing their ability to fund terrorist activity that could hurt us, whether it's in our country or abroad. So
when you say squashing, you mean militarily or economically sanctioning?
Economically squashing them to prevent the funding. So here's one thing I really do like about what Trump just did with sanctions. It's proven that it's removing funding Hezbollah. So all of a sudden these folks, there was like $100 million from Iran to build up Hezbollah and terrorist activities, and now a lot of that's being cut. There was a lot of free meals and health care and other benefits to
It's a
Iranian
401k matching too. wasn't it?
401k matching to Iranian families, and it's working. Now here's the problem, or it's the over the top poker example problem.
Right, world's policeman.
Now people are getting PO'd and saying, "Oh, if you're going to sanction us, then we're going to step up our activities." And even Saudi can't be trusted. They're probably getting money from Saudi Arabia. So could this cause a waterfall effect that ultimately creates terrorist activities that wouldn't have existed? That's a stretch because I think they're working on terrorist activities anyway. So I love what Trump's doing with sanctions. Do I think this should go to war? I mean, apparently Iran attacked those 4 oil cruisers. So if it gets to the point where Iran's initiating war, then we have no choice. But I don't think we should initiate war.
Or maybe we shouldn't be there in the first place. We've talked on other shows that we have bases in 180 countries. Why are we over there? If we weren't there, they couldn't make trouble.
Yeah, but I'm okay with getting rid of bases in Germany and wealthy countries that can fund themselves. But in areas that have proven high pockets of terrorist activities.
The Israelis can take care of themselves.
Stop it.
They can.
They're so small.
They have nuclear weapons.
Well, so that's what we want, nuclear.
No, but I mean, they can take care of themselves.
I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you sometimes and change my mind. You never agree or change your mind. I agree that there are military bases around the country that should be closed down to our benefit to save the money. But the Middle East is a hotbed of problems that we need to keep an eye on.
Okay, so let's talk quickly before we get into the final segment about the re-election bid and this culture war. And we did a show on abortion a few weeks ago, so we won't go deep into that. But just to encapsulate the last couple of weeks, several states, and if you remember on the abortion show, we talked about if Roe v. Wade ever got canceled, that it would just go back to the states, and certain states would have restrictive abortion laws, and other states would have really permissive abortion laws, and that's basically what you're seeing happening now. Any thoughts on how that will affect the culture war aspect of the 2020 election of, progressivism, and more conservatism?
Well, if it gets, another 100 million women to come out and vote, that'll absolutely impact the Democratic side and help them. But we did a pretty in-depth show on this very sensitive topic, abortion, a couple months ago. And here's my conclusion, and it's a simple one, right? As a Christian, we're supposed to say, nay to murder. So it comes down to the definition of when is an abortion murder? Is it at conception? Is it at X amount of weeks? Is it
never in some cases?
Never until the baby comes out of the womb. From common sense standpoint, and I'm not going to play God here, but I think there's 3 categories that abortion, if I'm not looking at it from a religious angle, makes sense. Incest, rape, and to save the life of the mother. So
that truly is the case.
I don't think there should be a blanket anti-abortion that also wipes away those options, because then that is impacting the rights of the mother and reproductive health and all that stuff. But for me, it's an egregious offense to have an abortion as a method of birth control, right? And look, I know plenty of people that have made mistakes. I'm not even talking about once. Again, I'm not playing God. But if there's plenty of examples of women having 3, 4, 5, 6 abortions strictly as birth control. If an average woman or progressive far left liberal doesn't get that, then I think there's something wrong with you.
Right.
So that's my conclusion.
Yeah, and I think the election, my early take on the election is going to be Trump touting the economy if it holds up for another 18 months. And pushing this, culture war aspect of pro-life, and there's certainly going to be a healthcare component to the election, which I think is going to be a big one. But essentially, on the economy, since we were talking about tariffs earlier, Trump just hopes that the economy doesn't blow up because there's a huge debt bubble globally. I read today, Rich, there's $10.4 trillion in negative yielding debt around the world. and mostly Germany and Japan, they have bonds that yield negative rates.
Yikes.
So that you actually pay someone to keep your money. I mean, you're in a bizarro economic world when there's that much money out there. So something bad's going to happen because these central banks have distorted markets and distorted free-flowing rates for so long. It's something bad's going to happen.
Student debt bubble's another one.
Auto loans. Yeah, there's lots of bad things. All right. So let's move on, Richie, to our final segment, and I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. There's 23 Democratic candidates. I'll try to keep it to the more popular ones here, so you don't have to go to the obscure ones. You know most of these, or at least have heard their names. This candidate is a war veteran and is running on an emphasis of minimal foreign interventionism by our military, and got blasted by neocons for meeting with Syrian President Assad. You may not know this one, but this would be my favorite Democratic candidate if I was forced to vote for one.
Oh, you just want me off the top of my head?
Yeah.
John McCain's daughter.
No. Tulsi Gabbard. She's a U.S. rep from Hawaii, and she's very anti-war.
No relation to Blaine Gabbert, the NFL quarterback?
No relation. But Tulsi Gabbard, look her up. She's pretty good. She's not good on everything, but she's good on war. This candidate is a former Rhodes Scholar, Afghanistan war veteran, openly gay millennial. What's his name? Do you know?
Tom Cruise?
This is South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Did you ever hear of him?
I can't even pronounce that or spell it.
He's like the new rising star, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He's gay, a war veteran, a Rhodes Scholar, and a millennial. I mean, he's got every box checked for a progressive candidate.
What's not to love?
He's a little short guy too, by the way. This candidate is a former hacker and was and is a skateboarder who emphasizes a net zero emissions ambition for 2050.
Elon Musk.
Come on, you must know this one. Beto O'Rourke. You don't know this? We got to get Richie up on his Democratic candidates. This candidate is running for a Humanity First campaign and is pushing $1,000 a month freedom dividend for every American 18 years of age or over. And by the way, he has also come out publicly against circumcision.
Why wouldn't you?
You probably do not know this guy. Entrepreneur Andrew Yang. He's one of the 23 running for the Democratic.
Is his first name Ying?
That's his middle name. This candidate was a Harvard law professor who is running a populist campaign and has proposed an annual wealth tax on net worth over $50 million. You know this
Bernie
one.
Sanders.
No, Elizabeth Warren. But hold that thought for the last one. This candidate for Democratic nomination is not a Democrat and emphasizes economic equality and fairness and proposes employee ownership as an alternative to our current model.
Chelsea Clinton.
Bernie Sanders.
I'm kidding.
He knew that one, Bernie Sanders. All right, just real quickly. The other ones, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, John Hickenlooper, Julian Castro, Kristen Gillibrand, Jay Inslee, John Delaney, Bill de Blasio, Amy Klobuchar, Seth Moulton, Tim Ryan, Eric Swalwell, Marianne Williamson, Wayne Messam, Steve Bullock, Michael Bennett, and our hometown area guy, Gropin' Joe Biden. Those are your candidates for the 2020
That is an all-American
Democratic
Pro Bowl lineup we have to look at.
So we're going to have some fun talking about that as we lead up to the election for sure, Richie. All right, any final comments, Richie, before we go?
Hey,
you're exhausted, I'm sure.
I have sweat dripping from the back of my knees. Listen, Trump is a social media idiot, but I think he's done some really good things lately. I like a lot what he's doing. Hey, he did not collude on the election. He may have committed obstruction, but Democrats, please move on. Move off of obstruction, move off of tax returns. Let's focus on what's important.
And my final comment is send me your comments to my critique today at Are We Idiots Show on Twitter or supporting listeners at areweidiots.com. Tell me how I'm wrong. I need to hear it. All right, folks, make sure you listen next week when we talk about the overall decline in happiness in America. That's kind of sad, actually.
Wow, that's sad.
According to the most popular, most reputable survey on the topic, peak happiness in America was in the early 90s. How about you, Rich? Was that your peak happiness in the early 90s?
Well, maybe mid-'80s, early 80s.
And there's a theory that many people are struggling with finding meaning in their life and a purpose for their life. So we'll talk about that. It's an interesting topic. And as always, please remember, if what you hear or see sounds...
Easy for you
Let's
to
try
say.
that again. As always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.